Hello and welcome to the European Resilience Initiative Center video podcast. Since almost a week, we observe Ukraine's offensive in Kursk region of Russia, the most massive and successful one. For the first time, Ukrainian regular army operates actively and openly in such an intrusion. Ukraine has already taken control over more than 450 square kilometers of Russia's land, or 170 square miles. This is comparable with all territorial gains Russia had achieved in Ukraine in 2024. The area of hostilities is even larger and has reached 700 square kilometers, or 270 square miles today. What does it mean to the Russo-Ukrainian war and for the future actions of the Western allies of Ukraine? We are talking today with Emil Kastehelmi. He is an open source intelligence analyst and a military history expert. He works for the Blackbird open source intelligence group. Welcome, Emil.
Thank you so much.
Thank you that you have found time for this conversation. And as we know now from the news and from all possible reports, the Kursk offensive of the Ukrainian army is pure success by now, and because situation changes rapidly, and of course some information which we will discuss today will be obsolete tomorrow. I stress we have the 12th of August today. It's early morning in Ukraine. I am in Lviv. It is 11 hours 12th August in Ukraine, and many things can change. But up to now, this offensive is like pure surprise for the Russians, and we observe it with fascination, at least me myself. So what does this offensive mean for the whole process, for the whole military decision-taking process in this war?
Well, as you said, it's probably one of the largest offensive that has been going towards the Russian soil actually after the Second World War. At least I don't recall any other offensive of a foreign country that would have actually entered Russia with such a force and actually also made so much progress. So there's at least some historical context for this also. And for the current war, the Battle of Kursk 2024 is a problem for Russia. It's a political problem. It's a problem in the information space, and also on the battlefield. It's the Ukrainian attack seemingly surprised the Russians, or at least even if Russians knew about it in advance, they weren't able to actually prepare for it enough. And as a whole, there's been some operational success, and it's of course an ongoing operation. So there's also parts of it that are difficult to know at the moment because the situation is still dynamic.
We know, of course, that from the Ukrainian side, there is almost no news from the ground. The Ukrainian army is very restrictive, understandably. The Russian army reports a lot of things, but many of them are pure propaganda. The Ukrainian army has been beaten, etc. So we are operating in a classic fog of war. We don't know what is happening on the ground. We can only rely on some sources which can be verified, but there are not enough of them. But one thing is absolutely confirmed and is very new. For the first time, there are regular units of the Ukrainian army which have crossed openly the Russian border. Not like ethnic Russian units like Russian Volunteer Corps or Legion Free Russia, which several times invaded Russia in Belgorod region before. Now we have Ukrainian mechanized brigades with all the equipment they have, and some cases of usage of even Ukrainian aviation over the Russian sovereign territory. What was the reason for Ukraine to go this way and to send its regular troops to Russia? What makes it different?
Well, of course, an operation like this is carefully planned for months in advance, most likely. So the Ukrainians have most likely considered their situation. They likely have needed to achieve some success somewhere. Well, of course, the other fronts are really difficult. In the south, the Ukrainians tried in 2023, and it didn't succeed very well. The Russians are really entrenched there heavily. In most of the eastern parts of the front, the Russians are on the attack, and even if the Russians would be pushed back a bit, then the Ukrainians would again face the problem of attacking at least a well rather well entrenched enemy without any problems with, or at least not with great problems with manpower and so on. So in Kursk, there was most likely an opportunity which the Ukrainians had already closely followed for weeks, for maybe for months, and they saw an opening and went for it. And it's also, things are happening on the battlefield, but also the information space is also really important. So by this, they can again show that some of the so-called Putin's red lines may not be as strict after all, and no Russian ground is saint, so to say. So it's a two-sided war where both parties can go anywhere, and this is also a risk that the Russians need to consider more carefully in the future too.
That is indeed one of the consequences of this operation, the significant increase of ambiguity of the actions of the Ukrainian army. The Russians need to prepare to much more possible outcomes, and that hopefully will make the Russians nervous. But what are the goals, or what were the goals of this operation? Obviously, the goals can be changed during the operation while it is ongoing. But what do you think were the first and foremost objectives of this intrusion?
Well, if we look at the operational level, I think the Ukrainians, even though they have done a great job, they probably have faced some difficulties. From a military perspective, taking Sudzha and Korenevo faster would have likely been desirable for the Ukrainian forces. And at least, well, Korenevo is still in Russian hands. Sudzha is at least partly. The eastern parts, the southeastern parts, are still under Russian control. So there's been some difficulties, but still the Ukrainians have been able to also change their directions a bit. At the moment, they are trying to go north from and surpass Korenevo, for example. So they are still adapting, and it's still difficult to say what the final goal on the ground actually is. How far are they? What do they want to go? How far do they want to stretch their front lines? Because, of course, creating a salient, creating a larger bulge also means that Ukraine has to commit its precious reserves to the operation more. So I don't think that the operation was intended to, capture the Kursk nuclear power plant, or actually go to the city of Kursk or anything like that. But what possibility is that because there's some uncertainties in the larger political contexts, the Ukrainians want to make sure that, for example, if Donald Trump wins the U.S. elections, there's some possible land that they control from Russia for future peace negotiations. That might come in handy. Also, in the information space, people are again looking at Ukraine's successes, not just the normal, Russians are advancing from village to village in Donetsk. So, the world is again looking at the Ukrainian army, which can now again make advances, make surprises, and also humiliate Russia and humiliate Putin. So there's probably a lot of various objectives, various goals, which range from the actual situation from the ground to the larger political and informational space context.
That is indeed what is fascinating in this operation, this interconnection between political goals and military goals, and the huge number of advantages which Ukraine could have got and has got from this operation already, like starting from the cutting Russia's supply lines, most of them railroads, but also normal roads, causing panic in Russia, threatening Russian army inside of Russia. The Ukrainians can put their artillery, for example, now on the Russian soil and increase effectively the range of the artillery, and also indirect political gains. Like nobody is now afraid in the West about Western equipment rolling through Russia, as it used to be like several months ago when one single Humvee operated by Russian volunteer corps, allegedly, I need to say, because there were still like no reports, no confirmation that this Humvee was captured there, but it caused an outrage in Washington, and now like nobody cares more about Bradleys and Strikers and Marders rolling through the Russian fields and gaining more land for Ukraine. But you have mentioned a lot of things which we'll of course address one by one in this conversation. But what I would like to ask you first and foremost, why the hell were the Russians so unprepared? They have invested that much money in what they said construction of protective lines, and now their soldiers are just capitulating in dozens, if not hundreds, and the Ukrainians entered Russian territory as if it was their own.
Well, of course, when there's like some military failures, there can be multiple variables for that. So there's the possibility that the Russian military intelligence hasn't been very good at their job, and they failed to provide a warning for the higher Russian command. There's also the possibility that they did their job well, but the Russian higher command, the commanders in the area, just didn't react accordingly, and so for a reason or another, didn't just believe, or they weren't able to convince higher ups to send more reserves in the area, or stuff like that. And then of course there's on the very tactical level, there's of course the fact that many Russian units aren't very skilled, very capable, and when the Ukrainians start pouring in, attacking with mechanized units, with engineering equipment to breach the defensive lines, then there's like probably some failures on multiple levels in the Russian system, and they were just unable to stop them. So the Russians needed to reconsider their situation. They had to prioritize defending some of these key locations, key roads, and by doing that, they probably then left some areas with less manpower, which then made it possible for Ukraine to actually advance deeper. It seems that there wasn't, especially in the initial phase, in the first 2 to 3 days, in some villages there wasn't really any really significant Russian defenses there, and also the Ukrainians were able to roll over actually 2 of the prepared Russian defensive lines. So that was indeed pretty nice feat from the Ukrainians.
Absolutely, and it also gave a sort of deja vu from March 22 with these burnt Russian columns. It looked like those Russian invading columns in Sumy or in Chernihiv regions or in Kiev region, all these Russian troops being destroyed close to Irpin or in Brovary, etc. But that is actually more or less, like, or is not more or less the same what the Russians tried to do 2 months ago in their Kharkiv offensive, which has failed. As many said that the Russians tried to get as much as possible. It will be good for them anyway, but the goal, the original goal, is to force the Ukrainians to remove troops from Pokrovsk area to Kharkiv and to weaken the Pokrovsk direction. Now it can be seen that for the Ukrainians, it is also the goal to force the Russians to pull their troops from Pokrovsk area to protect Kursk region, but the Ukrainians are much more successful in their actions.
Yeah. I'm not sure if the Russians have at least yet pulled very significant numbers away from Donetsk, because it would be logical to pull units from other directions at first, for example, from Kharkiv, maybe from Luhansk, and so on, because Donetsk is one of the main priorities for Russia. And even though the Ukrainians are attacking here, I'm fairly certain the Russians still would want to try at least to continue their operations in Donetsk as best as they could. And the Russians still do have reserves, at least they aren't running out of them. It's not like the situation in Kharkiv in 2022 when they were very spread thin. So it's likely that we will see units pulled from elsewhere at least. And then if still the Ukrainians are able to commit more forces, and still if the Russians just fail and can't stop the Ukrainian offensive, then it's not impossible that we could see at least partial disruptions of the Russian operations in Donetsk. So there's still these possibilities, but it's a problem that the Russians still do have a lot of troops to spare, and there's also the possibility that if they pull units from Kharkiv, maybe the Ukrainians will try to do something there. And the Ukrainians have also attacked across the border now in other places too, incursions, sabotage reconnaissance groups. So there's a lot of disruptions that Russians must take into account too at all the time.
Indeed, and the Ukrainians have demonstrated they can attack also in Belgorod region, which they have already done. But the border between Russia and Ukraine is huge, and a large part of this border was not an active front line. I love absolutely the saying of Mykola Beliskov, a Ukrainian military analyst, who said recently, when two countries are in war, there is no border between them, only front line. And that is true. And the Russians have obviously forgotten it and left some parts of this front line unprepared, believing that the Ukrainians will not dare to start what Ukraine has started. And now we observe a very interesting reaction from Russia, or better to say, a lack of reaction. Besides of several not very numerous harsh statements, first of all, of course, by Dmitry Medvedev, Russia's alcoholic in chief, and Maria Zakharova, Speaker of Russian Foreign Ministry, there were no loud statements, promises of retaliation or something like that. Vladimir Putin has said to his nation that he will give each family which resides from the region 10,000 rubles, which is, if I'm not mistaken, about $115. And people ask, well, if it is about like $115 per family which resides out of war zone, maybe there are no red lines for you. What does it mean for the reaction of the world on this war when Russia demonstrates that practically all the talks about the red lines is just hot air.
This is my personal opinion, but I hope that this could be used as a further proof for many Western countries to lift all restrictions of, for example, missile usage inside Russian territory and so on. So there's all kinds of absurd restrictions, and it's increasingly clear that there aren't any really strict red lines, especially in a case where Ukraine is still operating in what we could say border region. So it's I hope that in the political sphere this attack also changes some things. I hope that this could be used as an argument, for example, for Germany to provide Taurus missiles. Maybe United States would give Ukraine permission to fire more freely inside Russia. It's a daring thing that the Ukrainians did. I'm fairly certain not everyone is happy in the West also with this attack, but still, again, it's a good point that it's, after all, they are just weapons which are given to Ukraine, and Ukraine has to make the decisions. It's not something that the West can dictate forever, and this is like hopefully one of the last stronger shifts that the Ukrainians need to do before all of the Western decision makers who have been talking about escalation will understand these basic facts.
Well, in Germany, indeed, some politicians try to play this card, like German tanks for the first time after the World War II are rolling in Russia close to Kursk. That, as I see, you have some older World War II German helmets on your background. I say, yes, it's actually a great sign, because for the first time, the German tanks are doing a good thing at Kursk, and in particularly, they are beating the Nazis, the Russian Nazis, and that is great. That is why democracies have weapons to beat dictators and Nazis. And that is what the German tanks are doing now, finally, 80 years after they have done their wrong thing. But speaking about all the aspects you have mentioned and these long-range strikes against Russian territory, we have seen recently several attacks by Ukraine on Russian strategic military objects. Air base in Lipetsk, also other airbase, Chkalovsk, close to Moscow, and other objects in Rostov, etc. This density of such attacks, is it a coincidence, or can we say that the Ukrainians have come to quite another qualitative level of their attacks on Russian soil?
It's first of all, it's difficult to say with which weapon systems each of these attacks were conducted. So there's a lot of possibilities for that. Of course, when you do long range strikes, the Ukrainian intelligence carefully observes these sites and observes, for example, what risks are there for the operation, if they are actually able to pull it off, and so on. So we've seen an intensity of them, but it's really difficult to say what's the reason behind this. They have seen more windows of opportunities open, and then they have taken advantage of them. But then again, are these things related, for example, to the Kursk offensive? Can't really say for sure. Most likely, when they are hitting, Kursk, when they are hitting Lipetsk, that's probably one could say that's likely a part of this larger operation, supporting operation, at least for this land offensive. But I'm always wary of saying that this happens because of this, and because there can be some correlation, but then again, correlation doesn't mean causation. So that's always a good thing to remember, especially when we are working with open source data.
Absolutely, and saying that all these attacks are linked to Kursk offensive would mean that it was planned to the level of sharing information to that extent that it could have been dangerous. As more people or institutions know about something big is in preparing, the higher is the danger that this information would be leaked. Although, once again, as you said, Lipetsk air base could be a part of this offensive, of course, Russian planes can start from Lipetsk very closely to Kursk region and support Russian army, which is defending their positions. But you have already mentioned in the beginning of our conversation that any offensive operation needs to know where to stop. When the goals are reached and the price of going further is getting too high and the whole operation can be too risky and the success can turn into your defeat. What do you think is this level, this limit for the Ukrainians? Where will they stop? And will we see the full pullback of the Ukrainian troops after this demonstration of their efficiency?
At the moment, I would be surprised if the Ukrainians were to just pull back from this area. This offensive, it has, even though it has achieved a lot, if we look at the square kilometers, it hasn't been, like Ukraine has lost equipment, Ukraine has lost men in this operation too. So just leaving Russia, yeah, I would. I would think it's at least likely that the Ukrainians would like to hold on to at least some of the ground they have captured already, and it's really difficult to say how far do they want to go. It also depends on if there are supporting attacks from other sides. For example, if the Ukrainians want to go to Rilsk from some other direction, and how those attacks might go and unfold. That will of course shape the end result of this. But I still do not think that this operation will go on, for that many weeks, for that many months, before at least somehow consolidating. Because of course, also at some point, the Russians have brought in enough reserves to slow down the Ukrainian movement even more significantly, and so on. So yeah, it's really difficult to say. It goes maybe even more to the fortune teller ground than the analyst ground to actually say that this is where the Ukrainians will definitely stop. But at least we can say that the Ukrainians are still maneuvering, and at least we are still not in the final phase of this operation.
And once again, this is what is really so fascinating in this development. There are so many opportunities and there are so many interconnections. And one of the consequences is the fight between the Russian FSB and the Russian army, and this competition between different units. The so-called Kadyrovtsi, the Chechen troops led by and loyal to the dictator, Putin-installed dictator Ramzan Kadyrov, who bragged to be the best warriors in Russia. They have pulled back, and the FSB soldiers of the border troops have been captured. Now, FSB chief Bortnikov reportedly has overtaken the command over the military operation in the region, which is not the domain of the FSB. But obviously, Putin doesn't trust the army anymore. What does it mean for the internal fighting in Russia? There are so many factions within the Russian military forces who have their interest. We have observed it during the Prigozhin mutiny. But now, is it a new revival of that rivalry? And what does it mean for the stability of the Russian army?
It's difficult to say what it means for the whole Russian army, and developments like these before things go bad. It takes time. So I don't think there's any very rapid developments that would happen soon. But of course, all these things they hinder the effectiveness of the system. When there's competing actors with different kinds of aims, it really makes the whole system less effective. There's less trust, and there's for example, how other resources put between these different actors. There's also like probably optimization is not the word I would use in this situation. So and also now that there's maybe a even more strict FSB control of the operation in Kursk, I think that may not be the most ideal situation either. I'm not fully sure what's the most concrete reasoning behind this, but it's still the Ukrainian ground army that they are fighting there. So it might be actually a good thing for the Ukrainians at least in the near future.
Well, any change of the command of the enemy, rapid change amid ongoing fighting, is a good thing for the adversary. Yeah. And we also know that the FSB has no experience in military operations. We can say for right that the Russian army is not the best one, but the FSB generals are even worse generals regarding the command of the troops on the ground. So we will definitely see the development very soon. And what do you think? Can this incursion of the Ukrainian army into the Russian territory trigger some other political developments in Russia? Can it be a sort of a start of a crack in the Russian system?
At least it can be viewed as one of many cracks. There's been, of course, many politically embarrassing things, for Russia in this war, and this is one of the major things. The Russians aren't able to actually make very great gains. They are making gains in Ukraine, but it's coming at a huge price, and now it has been shown that the enemy can still conduct rather large operations inside Russia, and the Russians may not be able to keep all Russians safe. They have started a special military operation that is now somehow turned into a situation where there's many invading brigades on Russian soil with even Western vehicles. So it's the Russian propaganda will most likely figure some excuses, as they always do. They always come up with something, but it's increasingly difficult to try to show to the own people that everything is going well when, for example, around 500 square kilometers of Russia is in the hands of the armed forces of Ukraine. So yeah, I'm not saying that there will be any rapid collapses because of this operation, but it at least it doesn't really help the situation of Russia in any way, and of course for Putin this is also like a personal embarrassment, because this is the best that their army can do at the moment. This is the best protection that their forces can provide to the border regions, and this is the end result. So yeah, it's not really at all a desirable situation for Russia in any way.
Indeed, and this is once again a proof of Russia's weakness and of Russia's inability to defend even what is their sovereign territory according to the international law. And do we want it or not? Do we expect it or not? But this will lead to much more development on the ground. and hopefully it will lead to weakening of Russia's position on the international politics, and remove the last red lines from the decisions of the Western politicians, and encourage all those who would love to challenge Russia but were afraid to do it finally now. And we have talked today with Emil Kastehelmi. He's an open source intelligence analyst and military history expert. He works for the Blackbird open source intelligence group.